Ladies and gentlemen, live from the Eagle's Nest, here is Joe Madison.
You know, I was arguing or debating with a caller just about 20 minutes ago. Tony Rose is the author of, and we have it up here on our screen, America, the Black Point of View. And I was, as you heard me, I was arguing with him, you know, about my perspective. He's from Ohio. I'm from Ohio. He grew up in a small town somewhere. And I told him I grew up in west side of Dayton. I know my experiences are different, which leads me to my perspective. So I started reading America, the Black Point of View. And it's a recollection of memories. And I kept jumping around from point to point, and Tony Rose, I kept seeing myself. I kept reading about myself.
Right.
And thank you so much. Man, first of all, this is an interesting way that you put this book together. Sort of explain how you came up with this concept.
Well, I wanted to write about my experiences growing up in the housing projects of Boston, the Whittier Street Housing Project, and about the murderers, pimps, gangsters, drug dealers, drug addicts, rapists, child abusers, thieves I grew up with, lived with, and called family. We were all together, all living together there. And I realized that while I was writing it, that I couldn't write about it without writing about what put us there. I had to find who we were, why we were there, why we lived there, what we were doing in the ghettos in America, why we were poor, why we were suffering, why we lived in violence, why we lived in turmoil. And what I came up with after a lot of thought and research was that who put us there was the white man.
But then there are people who will argue, wait a minute, you know, this is more pathological. This is about self-determination. This is not public policy. It's personal responsibility. So how do you reply to those critics?
Well, in my studies, I found that the name white man or white people is the most hated name on the face of this earth. And if white people wanted to show that they are finally becoming civilized, that they should change their name from white people of America to what they really are, which is European American. Because what they have done is gone across the entire world to people of color and dehumanize them, rape them, brutalize them, and put them in poverty everywhere. From the Hawaiian Islands to the Native Americans, to Africa, to African Americans, to South American Mayans and Incans and Indians and people and Mexicans and wherever they've gone. Australia, the Aborigines, we end up in poverty and in violence with each other.
Tony Rose is my guest. The book is America, the Black Point of View. So as white Americans are listening to you, they're saying to themselves, some might say to themselves, wait a minute, that doesn't apply to me. Aren't you painting a broad brush, and is that fair?
They're the recipients of white privilege through the enslavement, through the brutalization, through the mass murders. In fact, the white man is the greatest mass murderer, serial killer, and rapist ever on the face of this earth. And their leader today is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the epitome of white supremacy and white privilege.
Why do you say that?
At a meeting, at a rally the other day that he did up in Boston, where I'm from, in Roxbury. Well, I'm from Roxbury. He was in Newton. He was talking about, he's a German, remember, also. And he was talking about rounding up illegal immigrants in Chicago and Ferguson. And I said, you know, he started saying, we're going to round them up. And the crowd started chanting, round them up. And these were white people of privilege. Round them up, round them up. And I started thinking about how if they're rounding them up, and then soon they could be rounding us up and putting us on buses somewhere. Because That's what they all think. I don't care what your white listener is doing. He thinks he's better than you. He knows he's better than me. Not because of anything but a generic thought that comes from Western Europe, where they began to think not only about themselves and Africans or us, long before they met us, Joe, long before they met us, they were fighting with themselves over religion, culture, land, power, greed, the whole thought of it. They were killing.
And one of the parts of the book and that was one part of the book that caught my attention, and I kept rereading it, was that you point this out, and you might want to explain to your audience, explain to the audience that race hadn't always been a factor. Race wasn't something that was part of this world we live in.
No, race is an invention. There's no such thing as racism. There's no such thing as white people or black people, just humans. But because of African slavery and them not thinking we were human, they decided that they had to be a white race and a black race. The black race subhuman, the white race civilized and human. We could not be the same thing. So that's where race came into play, and it came into play from Europe, from the more scientific people of Europe, people of power and might. They decided that there were two races. In fact, we were a species. There were two races, black and white.
So wait a minute before, because I think it kind of got lost. So before this whole definition of race came into being, people didn't talk about race. And you said this, I mean, you write this in the book. Folk in Europe were going to war over religion. They were going to war over property. They were going over war over whatever. But race was, and they were going to war with each other. So here comes the Portuguese primarily. They then start circumventing the globe, and then race becomes a factor because as part of the slave trade, because we're not human. You had to distinguish between the two. So before there was race, there was species. I got you. So, now the one thing I appreciate...
You can't enslave somebody and treat somebody inhumanly and brutalize them to this very day.
And one of the things one of the things I appreciated about the book as I was reading it is the footnotes, the documentation that you ended up researching. So so did you have to go into the bowels of libraries to get this information?
No, we're born with it ingrained in our head. You just got to bring it out of your mind, out of your brain. We lived with it for hundreds and hundreds, 500 years of brutalization of white people. In fact, the guy who shot the policeman the other day, and people and the reporters, because of post-traumatic stress disorder, we're all living with that in America. Every black person is living with PTSD. And because of that, I'm surprised we don't do that more often and just go crazy. Because in living the way we have to live in America, because of racism, segregation, ostracism, redlining, all the things that have been done to us, and then the lies, they actually lie and say they haven't done nothing. They actually lie continuously and say we should be fine. What is wrong with black people? And so we've been defined for years by white people, for hundreds of years. Our minds, our bodies, our everything. You know if you read the book, you know exactly what I'm saying. Our everything, our physique. And so I thought in the book I would define who white people are. The book defines, in the investigation and study of white people of America and Western Europe, who white people are.
Now,
we're defining them now.
Tony Rose is our guest. Now, let me again play the devil's advocate here. Not that the devil needs an advocate, but let me just play it for a second. So it's almost as if you're saying there's nothing, and only have a couple of minutes, there's nothing you can do about it. It's so ingrained, it's not going to change. So the question is, the final question, how do we reverse this? How do we change it? How is it changed? Maybe it's not a we, maybe it's a them. I don't know, but the question stands, how does change take place?
It's genetic and built into their minds and body set. And as we said, it comes from deep ingrained in Europe, goes back long before they saw us. First thing they can do is what I said at the top, change their name from white people to European American. That's a big start. That's a start. And the way we change from Negro to black to African American and then back to black again. Black lives do matter. Black lives matter because of the hundreds of millions of black lives taken and murdered by white people for 500 years. Black lives matter because of the hundreds of millions of black lives castrated, burned, alive, raped, lynched, shot, killed for 500 years because of white greed and power. Black lives matter because of slavery, segregation, and racism today in America. That's it.
All right. The book is America, the Black Point of View, an investigation and study of the white people of America and Western Europe. And also, I guess we keep adding, the autobiography of an American ghetto boy, 1950s and 60s. And I got to tell you, as I was reading that part, skipping through, we obviously come from the same generation, same background. You're Boston, I'm the Midwest. There was so much I could relate to. It was almost like we grew up as neighbors. So Tony Rose,
right.
the book is on our Facebook. Thank you for taking the time to talk about it. Thank you. We'll continue.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
All right.